The Italian Radio Hour is sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.
Mozilo matavo, cattavo e matto. Mozilo body per amore mia.
Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana. And Caterina this week is calling us, calling in because she's playing Nonna Sitter. Caterina, are you there with us? Well, while Caterina is getting connected, I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. And also be sure to like the Italian Radio Hour on Instagram and Facebook, and so that you will never miss any of the upcoming shows. E benvenuti ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Caterina, I'm missing my buddy. Is she on the line? Okay, well, I guess we lost Caterina. Caterina, call us back. And last week we had a great episode. We had a conversation with art historian Daniele Otteri, and we talked about Naples and also the beautiful series of books that are part of My Brilliant Friend, la mia amica geniale, and how to discover Naples through Elena Ferrante's novels. So I hear that there is a little bit of background noise. Caterina, it looks you are right there playing Nonna Sitter with beautiful Leonardo. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. Yes, I am a babysitter for the week, and I'm calling in from Rochester, New York.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time from your nonna-sitting duties to be with us today. So I just summarized a little bit of the conversation that we had last week. And so I'm going to ask you, you know that I always have my favorite, my language trivia, but had you ever heard about the expression rigirare la frittata? Or last week was the first time you actually heard it?
Actually, that's the first time I've ever heard it. It must have to do something about an omelet, right?
Well, kind of figurative, because when you do indeed flip the omelet, you always have one side it looks pretty and the other one that is still cooking. So we use this very common expression, because I always choose things that we do use in Italy, is when someone portrays a situation differently to their own advantage, so that they are going to portray the side that is actually convenient to them. So, rigirare la frittata was indeed the expression of the week. We thank everyone that has submitted their answers and guesses through our social media and also our email address.
Well, I guess now we can continue onward with, now that I'm connected, we'll continue onward. Tonight, we're headed to Umbria, the region between Rome and Tuscany, and we are going to be joined by Michelle Damiani. She is the author of Bel Centro, A Year in the Beautiful Center, and it recounts the year that she and her family lived in the lovely little town of Spello in the region of Umbria.
Ma prima, as usual, pubblicità. Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Okay, so we are definitely ready to introduce officially our guest of the evening. Michelle Damiani is a clinical psychologist. She is the author and a lover of Italy. And with her husband, she moved, and the 3 kids and 2 cats. She moved her entire family to the town of Spello for the entire year of 2012. And while in Spello, she wrote a blog about their experiences entitled Il Bel Centro. When she returned back home to the U.S., she transformed the blog into a book, which was listed by Huffington Post as one of the top 10 fascinating books about living in a foreign country. She has also written a series of 4 novels that take place in a fictional town of Santa Lucia, loosely based on her beloved Spello. She has also written The Road Taken, How to Dream, Plan, and Live Your Family Adventure Abroad. Buonasera, Michelle. Welcome to our show.
Grazie. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, by looking at the action, so to speak, on our social media, there are a lot of people that have been waiting to hear you tonight. And so Kathy and I are very privileged to be able to ask you a ton of questions.
Oh, good. What an honor. Thank you.
So the first one that I was actually curious, you have, I don't know if it's considered a middle name, Pina, but I heard you have on a different interview that you're originally from Panama. Is there any recollection, or were you such a teeny tiny baby when maybe you moved to the U.S.? Anything that you would like to share with our listeners?
No, unfortunately, my memories of Panama are being at the zoo and seeing a crocodile with a turtle on its head, and that's about it. We left when I was about 2 years old. The last name, my middle name, or one of my last names, sort of my middle name, my maiden name is Pina, and that comes from my father's side. So we were in Panama because he worked for Sears International. So my parents met in San Francisco, moved to Panama, moved to Brussels, moved to Chicago, and after that we were stateside.
No wonder why then you moved your family, because you had already itchy feet, right? You were
Guilty.
born with that.
Correct. I blame them.
And so was he something that, I know that obviously you are a writer, but also an avid reader, and you probably have a collection or interest in people that have done something exceptional for a year, whether it was sustaining themselves out of things that they had grown or some other experiences like that. And so here it is. You that were reading about these books, now we are reading about you having done it. How did this idea come about with your family, with your husband? And was Italy already the chosen country, or were you presented with or thought about different options?
I think Italy was always the unspoken chosen country. My husband and I got engaged in Italy. We went on our honeymoon in Italy. It was the first trip we took when our children were small. It was our first family trip. So it was always omnipresent on our radar. And, when we were younger, I wanted to do all of the things. I wanted to settle down for the first time in my life, but I also wanted to travel, and I wanted to write, and I wanted to be a psychologist, and I wanted to have a family, and et cetera, et cetera. And, as you get older, you kind of box yourself in. And I started thinking that all the things I used to want weren't possible anymore. And then one day, the world just kind of shifted and opened up, I guess. When you have your final child and you move into child rearing instead of childbearing, I think things shift. And so my husband and I, we had spent a lot of time before we had children thinking that we wanted to move to Italy. We would go to Barnes & Noble and surround ourselves with the 2 books that they might have had about how to move to Italy, but we, whipped through them and we wanted to do it. And then it just kind of fell off. You have children, you get involved with the box that you put yourself in. And then we were having this dinner and for our anniversary, and we were at Barboursville Vineyard, which is a lovely vineyard outside of Charlottesville, and we're having lovely wine and lovely Italian food with a lovely view of vineyards. And I said, is that really? Are we not ever going to do that? And then there must have been some sort of magic in that moment, because we went from saying, how could we ever do that, to why not? And then once you say that, the power dynamic, the feeling in the room just shifts completely. And so all of a sudden we're off to the races thinking, when could we go? How could we do it? We decided on a 5-year plan. That way our youngest would be 5 and in school, and all our kids could go to public school in another country and have a completely different sort of experience. And we briefly flirted with the idea of going to France, but Italy is just the place that we felt really bright and happy. I have French background, so I do feel a pull there, but I think Italy was always going to be the winner for us.
Wonderful.
Well,
Before I hand it
what
over
were the biggest challenges that you faced in planning this move? Because that's a big undertaking to pick up a whole family, and you have to take care of housing, et cetera, et cetera. How did you figure out how to do this?
Yeah, it was a little complicated. I think it works that I am the dreamer and my husband is the builder. So he, for instance, he takes on the boring logistical stuff that I just cannot focus on. So, for instance, he's the one who figured out how to get visas. I was the one who looked around and found houses that I would like to imagine being in, online. Airbnb wasn't really a thing then. It was just VRBO. And we knew we wanted to live in a large village, small town. So the options that we could find weren't really all that many. So we were able to narrow them down. But he's the one who got us plane tickets so we could go and scope them out. So that kind of division of responsibility was certainly helpful. I think really, honestly, the biggest hurdle is one that very few of your listeners will also have, which is that at the time that we decided this, we were maybe 1/4 of the way into renovating our century-year-old house, which my husband did almost all of the renovations, and he is not a builder or a contractor. And he did a fantastic job, but it made everything much more slow going. So we sank a lot of our resources into the house. We sank a lot of our time and intention into the house. And so the house became really our biggest hurdle. But everything else sort of fell into place. Like getting a renter was actually sort of easy. Once we broadcast that we wanted someone to live in our house for a year, we had friends who worked at the law school, and law schools are pretty big on people coming for a year as sort of a quasi-sabbatical. So they told us that there was a family coming to the law school for a year from Israel. We connected with them, loved them. That was easy. Mm-hmm. So there were hurdles for sure, but they all seemed pretty manageable. I really think that the biggest hurdle besides the house was a withering of intention. Like over time, it's hard to imagine. It's like, oh gosh, but we have to do this. And it's just the energy it takes to sustain that kind of motivation.
It's like
it can be hard, but
marathon,
that's where the
sprint.
dreaming comes in.
Yes, where you, at some point you hit the wall. Actually, you're closer to the finish line, but you have exhausted most of your resources in the process. I was wondering if Spello was indeed a straight choice, or you had experience, you came maybe on a scouting trip and on different places, and then eventually you came to choose Spello. Tell us a little bit about finding, so to speak, the ideal location, which turned out to be Spello.
It did turn out to be Spello, but we did not think so. And in fact, when we were sitting on the airplane comparing our list, we had maybe 5 or 6 places, I can't remember now, listed, and Spello was at the bottom of both of our lists for reasons I can't even remember now. I think there was just compelling features of other places. But we landed in a town, and it was the town that I thought for sure we were going to choose. And then it just didn't fit right. Like, I felt like we were walking through the town and we had to library our voices because there was nobody around. We came up with this theory that everybody had a party when we were gone, and then when we would arrive, the town would shut down again. It was so quiet. And then we found out that at the school, I think it was 1/4 to 1/3 of the students were native English speakers. And they stuck to themselves, which is, of course, understandable, but that's not the experience that we wanted for our children. And then we went to another town, and it was sort of the same thing. And then we started thinking, well, maybe this is just not going to happen the way that we wanted it to happen. Maybe this, really digging into an Italian town, maybe we just can't do it. And then we arrived in Spello, and I like to think it took us a few days to decide, but really it was within 45 seconds. Like, we got out of the car, and there were kids running to the school bus through the piazza. There were old men playing cards in the piazza. There were people standing around talking. The person who became our landlord shuttled us in to get a coffee, and everybody was so kind and welcoming, and it just seemed like a no-brainer. Like, this is life. Like, this place had life. And I ended up having a a talk with the vice mayor at the time, and I told him that, and he said, yeah, well, that's intentional. Like a lot of these Italian towns, they drift their services to the periphery, like towards the ring road, so that's, easier parking for people to get in and out. And even though a lot of people in Spello don't like it, the town has been very, very clear that they wanted to keep those services within the town. So the lower school, the middle school, the pharmacy, the post office, the police station, all of those are right off the piazza. So it keeps the life in the center of the town, and that's just what we grooved on.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm sure Kathy will ask you a bunch of questions. She was also interested about the educational system. But I before announcing that she would be on the show with us, I posted some of the pictures that I took this summer. I was just there this summer, and really,
lovely.
Spello cast a spell on me. It was so beautiful. It was so refreshing. And we're just coming from Castelluccio. We saw the Lentos fields, and it was just a beautiful vision for the eyes. But once we got to Spello, and our hotel was, not even a minute from the piazza, there is indeed that vibrancy, that comfort. We really, really loved it. So when I look at, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I have to tell you, Michelle, I read your book several years ago, and it actually inspired us to specifically go to Spello this past November. And like Viviana, we were totally entranced by the lovely little town. A little different in November, perhaps, than in the summertime. But we stayed for about 6 days in Agriturismo, just north of Spello.
I wonder if Michelle knows where you stayed. Do you remember the name?
It's
Il Bastione. We stayed in Il Bastione.
The name is not ringing a bell, but I'm not as familiar with the agriturismi around there as I am with the places in the center.
It's just like north of where that parking lot is in the north part of town, and you go through the olive groves up on the top of the hill. It's way up about a mile up on the top of the hill. It overlooks the valley in the town. Yeah,
and it's funny because obviously when you go into Spello, it's everything about olive trees and some salumi that that have very unique naming conventions, which obviously we had to bring back home. But it's funny because both my husband and I, there is this one little shop that has a lot of products made out of olive tree wood. And actually, this company, you can find quite a few items here in the U.S. But I was so happy because I really liked their products here in the U.S. They had these baby trees, olive trees that you could, they trying to encourage people to support olive trees. So actually we brought them back to Rome because that's my home base when I'm in Italy. And my father had to give them nicknames of Tippi and Tino, coming from Socrates and his name Santippe. So we have these two little trees growing in Rome that are a clear memory of Spello. So now I have the book
that's lovely.
in my hand right now. And both Kathy and I are cat lovers. And obviously, you cannot miss the cat that is here. I would like, let's start from the cover. Tell us about this cat. And did you know anything about this cat before you took the picture? Or was it just coincidental that he was or she was roaming around? And I think he also inspired something else in Santa Lucia. So
exactly. So I actually didn't take that picture. It was a friend of mine who's a photographer and was living in Brussels at the time and came to visit. And she took all these photographs and was so kind to let me use that picture for the cover. I just love it. She took another one with a cat on the arch, but this one just fit better for the cover. And so the year, we were there until 2013, and then it took me like a year to turn Il Bel Centro, the blog, into a book, and then like another year to edit it. It was quite the process. And then I launched it in July of 2015, and Spello had a book party, which was so lovely. And they provided somebody named Anya to help translate my words for the town and vice versa. And when we sat down together, she said, "So that's my cat on your cover." And I was like, "No, you've got to be kidding me." And so she told me that the cat's name was Birbo, and as an homage to that, when I created the Santa Lucia series, I made the bar Birbo, just as a nod to the cat on the cover of Bel Centro.
Excellent, because Birbo, Birbante, being like a little rascal, and I can, obviously, because we do have cats that climb everywhere. So let's get into the book. Kathy, I'm going to let you ask all the questions that you had in mind. She has been dying to talk to you.
Well, certainly a lot of what impressed me about your book is really how your family really tried to assimilate into the community, and especially with the kids. With your oldest son, Nicholas, seemed to do really well with the school system. Your daughter maybe had a little bit of an issue. Your youngest, of course, Gabe, is 5 or 6 years old. But can you tell us a little bit about how you dealt with getting them into the educational system in Italy, how it differs from the U.S., and how your kids adapted, and that whole experience, because that I thought was an integral part of your book.
Yeah, I felt that too, obviously, because I was the one writing it, and that's the experience I was living every day. And I think that them being in the school system was definitely the seat of the most profound transformations that each of us individually and as a family had over the course of that year. So before we came to scope out these schools, we would try to contact somebody at the school to kind of meet us so we could basically walk through the school. And the person who responded from Spello, her name was Antonella, and she is just a force of light in the universe. And that was definitely one of the driving forces to us saying, okay, this is the school for us. She ended up being Gabe's kindergarten teacher, or there was prima, was first grade. And so that's how we got into it. She kind of helped us shepherd the process, let us know, wait, you have to go fill out all these forms. Oh, wait, no, you did the wrong forms. Come back and do these forms. So she was instrumental in sort of shepherding us through what was often a very topsy-turvy and confusing process. And back then, schools were not really online. I'm sure they are. I know they are now, particularly after COVID, and also a lot of time has elapsed. But so just having an email contact that spoke English, because she was the English teacher, was really a soft place to land for us. Even so, preparing them to go to school. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I mollycoddle my children, and I, particularly back then, I just didn't want them to have even the scrape of a bad idea. So sending them into a school where they didn't know the language, they didn't know the people, they didn't know the customs, was a little bit terrifying. And what made it my first kind of watershed moment in that process was being able to tell myself it will be rough and they will be fine. They will still come home with all their limbs. They will be fatigued. They will be shaken, but they will be fine. And once I recognized that, I was better able to, I think, to communicate that to the kids. And so sent them on their way. But it was hard. My daughter's eyes were full of tears, and my baby son's chin was quivering, and Nicholas, being Nicholas, he just ran down the hill. He was just ready to roll. But his school was a middle school. It was different. So they each had their own experiences. Gabe was spanked, I think, in, November? No, I can't even remember now. That was a big thing we sort of had to deal with. Sienna, her teacher wasn't the kindest. Some of them were. One of them was not. So she really kind of had to learn to step up, and it was not always easy. But I think that the biggest bit of grace it gave me was this trust that my children will be fine. And so even after we've come back, things aren't easy here either. There's, my son started high school and my daughter started high school, and they've had all these experiences here. But I just maintain this real faith that they will be fine. And that's helped me back way up, which I think has made me a better parent.
Wonderful. So
That's
before we
great.
continue with this conversation, just our 30 seconds worth of pubblicità. Applying for dual citizenship? Need documents translated? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translation and interpretation services in 20 different languages. Be sure to visit us at www.istitutomonditaliano.org. Well, welcome back. We're talking with Michelle Damiani about their experience in Spello in Umbria and how the family adjusted. So you were talking about the children, but let's focus a little bit about you. How was your routine, your daily life shifted? How long it took you maybe to get into a routine, and maybe some people that were pivotal in facilitating your adjustment, your assimilation into the community?
Well, I think that inherent in that question is that I was transitioning in that time from being a therapist to being a writer. At that time, we didn't have telehealth, which, we do now, thanks to COVID. So I was a practicing clinical psychologist, couldn't take my clients with me when I left. And I'd had, one of those dreams I had when I was really young was being a writer. And I had put it on a shelf thinking writers don't make money. It seemed kind of impossible. And to tell the truth, I think I was just way too scared of rejection to even try. So that, like the travel need, that just sat untasted for a really long time. But I started writing a couple years before we left. I won a short story contest that was juried by John Grisham, and so I thought, well, maybe I can do this thing. And so part of the dream of going abroad was that I wanted to write about it. You're correct from your beginning introduction that I love stories about people who do something different for 1 year, and this was different, at least for us, to take our 3 kids and our 2 cats and go to a town and put our kids in the public school system. So I began writing. And so the writing every day was a focal point for me. That took at least an hour, a couple hours a day. I posted just about every day. I think I started taking weekends off towards the end when I realized that was just better for my sanity. So that was a big part of it. Another major part of it was I was taking Italian lessons with a man who ended up being just a real guardian angel for all of us.
No pun intended. His name is Angelo too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's no surprise. I think the universe has something intentional when that was his name. He's just a wonderful human being, very open-hearted. He soothed me a lot when I was worried about sending my kids to the school. He said the school is for all children, not just Italian children. He speaks almost no English. He can say underground, and I don't know why. There's a couple words like that, but he would translate Italian into slower Italian. So, for instance, when my husband ended up being hospitalized for pneumonia late in the time that we were there, and he went with us, and he didn't speak any English, but he translated anyway, because he took their medical jargon / Bolognese accent, because people in Foligno, which is like 2 kilometers from Spello, speak completely differently from the people that we were used to. But he would take what they said and then turn to us and say it again slightly slower. So that's what I mean. He just really looked out for us. He helped us. We lost our cats. He was roaming the streets with us. He was just a real loving human being.
And Angelo, it continues to be a presence in your life, also in your writing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when I finished Bel Centro, he sent me a video via a mutual friend. He doesn't have any technology. His phone is like, the kind you just press the actual buttons on. But he had a friend take a video and send it to me. And in this video, he said, I noticed that you're not blogging anymore. And I get it. You're not here. There's nothing to write about. But if I can make a suggestion, invent something. And I thought, well, that's an idea. And that was what speared me taking off with this idea to write this book series loosely based on Spello and the people that we met there, and really kind of an homage to the life that we had when we lived there. But even more than that, he ended up writing the stories and legends of Spello. He is a repository of information about Spello because his aunt who raised him was a phenomenal storyteller, and Angelo was an incredible listener. So he's written all these stories, and I'm translating them for him to bring it to an English-speaking audience. So yes, absolutely, he is still a real presence in our lives.
Indeed, that's pretty fascinating. Kathy, I'm sure you have a question on tip of your tongue.
Okay. Well, you described your typical day, dealing with the school issues with the kids and writing, but also I recall how much you enjoyed cooking.
Oh, yeah.
And can you talk about some of your favorite local food specialties from Spello or from the Umbrian region, or the things that you learned about or things that you liked to cook?
Okay, so do we have another 3 hours? Please tell me you have another 3
Well, we
hours.
have 5 minutes before we open up the lines, and also you've been very gracious to include some of these recipes also in your book. I just came across the sedano ripieno, but I'm going to let you answer your question. No prompts needed, I know.
I think what I learned to do when I was there was basically just cook without a recipe, letting go of the old conventions and my old ways of being. I started just kind of cooking by smell and taste, and I would bring Angelo things, and he would bring them to people. So I would be walking down the street, and people would say, "Oh, that was really good cookie you made the other day." And I was like, "Wait, what?" So I became much more instinctual. I really started to pay attention to taste and flavor and the touch of things. I started going to and I still do this. We lived in Spello again last year, and I would ask whoever was in the shop close to me, "What is this and how do I cook it?" And that became my recipe book. And I would go back and just cook up a storm. And I learned to cook pasta in the Umbrian way with a wooden roller so that it takes on the texture of wood and therefore absorbs the sauce in a different way. Mm-hmm. I learned to make a Sagrantino wine sauce. Sagrantino is the big, bold wine that comes out of Umbria that has no genetic relatives. It's a really iconic and very different grape, and you can make a sauce out of it that is just blissful on gnocchi. There's a lot of truffles there. That's big.
Yeah, tartufo is something that you see quite regularly, whether it's on the menus or as a souvenir to bring back to Riga. And as far as the holidays, were there any traditions, whether there were food traditions that you, particularly you and your children, enjoyed, anything that you have maintained in once back in the U.S., anything that comes to your mind?
Well, most of the holiday traditions are religious, and being Quaker, I wasn't really kind of keyed into the Catholic aspects of being in Italy so much as I appreciated them and participated when I could, but really as an observer, not a participant. But things like La Befana at Christmas time, we still play the game, we still run around, and the kids find candy in their shoes, whoever happens to be home. My kids are, two of them have now flown the coop. So that was one. And then at Easter, instead of having an Easter egg hunt, kids get a giant chocolate egg. Mm-hmm. And so I still bring those just as a reminder of the Easter traditions we had there. And then when I have parties, they're always invariably spritz parties where I make a ton of focaccia, and the same kind that my kids ate in public school. So the red kind with just the red sauce, and then the white kind with rosemary. Those are the two kinds of focaccia I make, because those are the two that are embedded into our family soul, and spritzes, and that's our party.
Mm-hmm.
Spello is home to the annual Infiorata Flower Festival. Can you tell our listeners about this unique festival and how the community gets involved and how your family got involved in it?
Yes, this was a real magic element to our year. I had no idea. I'd read about the Infiorata, but I didn't really get it until a couple months before, when my kids, their friends, their classmates were missing school because they were collecting flowers. And then we started noticing, the older women in the alleys, just taking petals off of flowers over and over and over again. And then we were asked, we were just walking down the street the night before the Infiorata, and one of a member, Ricardo, from one of the teams, he said, "Come, do this with us." And so we said, all right. So we showed up, and he gave us a section. So what it is every team makes either a flower carpet, which runs down the streets, or a big square, like a painting, in one of the piazzas. And they are so intricate and so fine-tuned. Like the people, ours was a Raphael painting, and the maestro who's working on that is working with like these pulverized seeds, and he's shading in all these colors, and it is absolutely spectacular. And it gets crowded, and people are passing over and over and over us, and we're just working, and people who aren't laying the flower carpet but part of the team are like pressing food into our hands. We stopped for a meal around 11 or midnight, which was pasta with wild asparagus and guanciale, and it's amazing. And then people kept passing us, and I would hear them say to Ricardo, what happens if it rains? Because, these flower petals they're not battened down. They can just float away. And he said, well, God saw it. And I thought, oh, gosh, that just hit me where I lived. And then the next day, the priest comes through holding the host in a special device. And the flower carpet has been part of Spello for this purpose, which is it's to keep the host that's held by the priest from having contact with the street. So the flowers protect the priest's feet from the street. So he's walking through, and there's a parade that's walking through. So the flower carpet gets mussed up, but in some way, in its imperfection, it becomes almost more perfect. I can't even explain how absolutely holy this day felt for me and for my family. We were really part of the town. We had such pride in being part of it.
Fantastic. And so if anyone wants to join this lovely conversation with Michelle, we would love to keep her all for ourselves, but we're not that selfish. We would like to open the phone lines, and the magic number to dial is 412-825-6262. Again, if you want to join the conversation with Michelle Damiani, the number is 412-825-6262. In the meanwhile, we're still going to ask you more questions.
I was wondering, Michelle, in 2020, you and your family returned to Spello, correct, during COVID?
Yeah. What a funny time, right?
Yeah, right. How was that experience, and how is it different from your previous wonderful experience pre-COVID? It must have been quite interesting.
It was quite interesting. This was our default plan that ended up feeling like we won the lottery. So we had actually siphoned off this year to do a year around the world. Gabe is very much my son. He's also a dreamer. We spent many hours with maps of the world plotting where we'd bike and where we'd walk. And my daughter took a gap year. She graduated from high school, was going to take this gap year, and we were going to travel the world. And then COVID happened. And while all the doors were getting shut down, the thing that became clear is that Italy's door was not shut down, because the year that we were there, my husband got his citizenship from his bisnonno, his great-grandfather. So he got citizenship for himself, and for the kids. They all had Italian passports. And so that was a route we could take. And so we lived there for a year. It was really different. We didn't have school to contend with, which it was wonderful. Obviously, when we were there, we met so many people. But it was nice, I have to say, to not have alarm clocks. We all woke up when we felt like getting up. And then my husband and I worked East Coast hours. So we would have the morning together, travel or do whatever. Most of the time we couldn't travel because Spello was locked down. But, walk around town, walk through the olive groves, finding like these minute ways to celebrate the world. And then I would make a big lunch, and then I would go to work. My husband would go to work. My youngest son would homeschool, and my daughter, we got her a little art studio in the center of town, so she would traipse off and do her painting, and that was our routine. So it was a fundamentally different routine from the one before. It was way more follow your leading than it was being organized by school bells. And there was some downside. It sounds great, and it was great. The downside was it was definitely a less social year. I mean, people were scared for good reason. Mm-hmm. So we saw fewer people, but the people we saw, we really got to deepen relationships with, and that was lovely. Gabe took Italian lessons from Angelo, so they got to deepen their relationship. So all in all, I mean, just
No,
like
not
I
a bad
said, it feels
place
like we
to
won the
be in.
lottery.
Exactly. We do have a caller on the line that we're going to bring on. Hello, who do we have on the line with us?
Hi, this is Tony.
Hi, Tony. Thank you for calling in. So what's your question for Michelle?
Well, I was just wondering, I have a personal connection with Umbria. My grandparents on my mother's side came from the small town of Norcia, which is in the mountains east of Spello. And I just wondered, they're noted for truffles, and they're noted for their wonderful prosciutto. And I just wondered if you had an opportunity while you were there to sample their prosciutto, and maybe did you actually visit the town?
Oh, yes, twice. So during the first year that we were there, we went. And then we went this last year, which was really different because, as you probably know, there was a gigantic earthquake, a few years ago that they're still in recovery from. I'm actually working on a book now called Ciao Umbria, and in it I write about a lot of the gifts that Umbria has. And there's a whole chapter on Norcia because it brings a lot to the Umbrian crown of goodies. Truffles for sure, but from where I sit, really, it's the boar. I mean, those woods around Norcia are teeming with wild boar, and they have boar in other parts of Italy, but only in Umbria do those boar eat truffles. So that cingale meat, those cingale salami, have a fundamentally different flavor, really pronounced, really beautiful, really heady, that is like nowhere else in the world.
Well,
yeah, and the monks, the Benedictine monks, make a great beer, too.
you just told
that is absolutely
I was
true.
See, salamini di Norcia, who doesn't know? I can taste them now in my mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Tony, thank you very much for your call. I
Thank
hope
you
you'll
so
get
much.
to go back
Thank
to
you.
Umbria soon. So that kind of opened up the conversation about some of the other places that you have either discovered or appreciated the most during your different stays in Umbria that might not be as well known to our audience and listeners that you would like to give a shout out to.
Right. Well, the really neat thing about Umbria is that it's a land of hill towns. And in the age before, easy transportation, each little hill town was basically its own country. So each little hill town has its own claim to culinary fame, different traditions, different ways of celebrating holidays. So really the thing that we loved doing was like going out to lunch somewhere on a Sunday and then traipsing slowly back, stopping into just random hill towns because they all felt really different, knowable because they all have these threads, right, of a similar culture, but different enough to make them really interesting. Some favorites for me were Bavagna, which is close to Spello and is different in that it's not a town on a hill, it's in the valley, so it gives it a different aspect. And they recently discovered Roman ruins in somebody's garden, and so unearthed the whole thing and turned it into a museum, which is it's Roman baths, which are spectacular. So that's a favorite. Perugia, which is the major city in the capital, is just wonderful. It's got just the proportions of this town are dizzying. They're so tall, it feels like it was made by giants. Orvieto, I think, is getting more and more on the tourist trail, but that hasn't made it lose any of its luster. It's like sitting on a beacon on a hill kind of a thing. Like it's just rising on these cliffs, and it's just so beautiful. We would go to the lake a lot, have some aperitivi with a look over the Lago Trasimeno, which is just really big and quite beautiful. There's the falls at Marmore, which are man-made. They power an electric plant around there, but that river that runs through there is so cold, it leads to the best trout you've ever had in your life. Such good trout. So going through the falls, because having a more of a nature experience, there's even a place you could go around there to do whitewater rafting, or our version, which was like paddling gently down a very gentle river, which was more our speed. It's like around every corner, there's something just to discover.
You, Kathy, have been to Bevagna. Am I correct? Or am I putting you on the spot? We lost Kathy. I personally, I really liked Narni as well. We were there when all the sunflowers were blooming, so you have these endless fields of, they're just dreamy. There is one place that I haven't gone to that is actually pretty famous, and I believe it's a municipality of Foligno, and that is Rasilia, where they also use the water and I believe also the fabrics, the threads. Did you have you been there? Are you familiar by chance with these?
Yes, it's like the Venice of Umbria. It is so beautiful. There's all these canals that work their way through, and it powered these looming mills, and they have really spectacular photographs around the town that show that ancient works that kind of ties you really into it. One of the times that we were there was after a festival, and they had, instead of a streamer, they had a giant scarf that was woven. Yes. I can't even imagine how long this thing was, but it wound all through the town above your head, and it gave it a real kind of festival air. It's very sweet, very charming. So many flowers.
Wonderful. Kathy, I believe you're back on, right?
Yes, I'm back on. Yes, I am back on.
We were talking about Bevagna and some other places, maybe Piegaro. You've been there as well?
Yeah, which is your favorite town? I think, did you mention your favorite town? You said Bevagna, correct?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the artisans that are there? I think most of our listeners don't know about this interesting thing about
you mean
Bevagna.
The festival?
Yeah, the festival they have every year.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's really amazing. So it's a festival of, I would say, like the arts and careers of the Middle Ages. It's the kind of the best way I would have to describe it. So, for instance, you can go into one area where they're making illuminated manuscripts, and you can see the whole process from how they dry the skins and how they make the pigments and how they turn those into paints and how they apply the gold leaf and all the intricate work that went into that, along with ceramics and metalworking. And you really get a real sense of, first of all, the amount of labor it took just to live back then, but also what the town felt like back then. It's pretty cool.
So all these little towns.
Interesting. I remember going to see candle making and paper making. That was quite the process to make paper from rags. It was very interesting. And also, Bevagna is interesting also because it's not up on a hill, correct? It's
correct.
Down in the valley, sort of.
Yeah, it gives it a real different aspect.
We have, I don't know if Kathy can hear me. We have just a couple of minutes. So I would like to ask Michelle if, so you mentioned the Ciao Umbria project. Is there a murder mystery coming up as well? Can you?
There is. I have so many books in the works right now. It's a little bit crazy. So I have Ciao Umbria, which I'm still working on. And then I have Angelo's book, which I'm almost done with the translations for, the stories of his Zia Faustina. And then my first cozy mystery is launched on June 1st, and it's called Death in Eramezzo, another town I made up.
Oh,
I just
Kathy?
received the PDF. I'm one of your advanced readers. I just started it last night, so I hope to get it done before the end of hopefully by Monday I'll have it done. So I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm a fast reader, and I enjoyed your other Santa Lucia book, so I'm looking forward to this one. So I see it starts off in a chef's kitchen, so I'm assuming there's something related to food, right?
Oh, it's all related to food. Yes, this was such a pleasure to write. Unlike Santa Lucia, which has like 16 main characters, and the book is kind of told from sort of each of their perspectives, and they wind together. Those were a labor of love. They're pretty tricky to write, though, combining 16 perspectives. I mean, not each time. Each book was more like 6 or 8. Was tricky. So just doing a single point perspective from the view of this chef who was Me Too'd out of New York. She was blackballed, and trying to make a new life for herself in her ancestral village in Umbria. Oh, gosh, just such a hoot. We had so much fun coming up with plot points over lunches in Umbria. It was just a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Definitely looking forward to finishing it.
I'm telling you, Michelle, you have your fan, number one fan on the line with us right now. So, and I believe also you were so kind during the COVID to make Santa Lucia available to a broader audience, right? So
the first book is free, and the first the electronic copy of it is free. I was hoping to just kind of lighten the pandemic for people.
Indeed. So, well, we are indeed at the end of this very pleasant conversation. We will be asking you to come back once you have the other book out, and so that we can continue this conversation. I know that people are like Kathy are devouring your books. So anything that you put out there, we would like to have you back. But for tonight, grazie mille e alla prossima, Michelle.
Alla prossima. It was a delight. Thank you so much for having me.
Grazie. Well, unfortunately, the hour is almost up.
E il Big Ben ha detto stop.
Yep, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And Viviana, before we leave, who will be our next guest?
Actually, I should say our next guests. So next week we will have two Italian women with very unique occupations. We will have Nadia Fugazza, originally from Piedmont. Now she's living in California, and she has a podcast that is called Murder Italian Style. And then we have Alessandra Rellini. She's originally from Genoa. Now she's living in Vermont, and she has a farm and an agriturismo and a production of Italian style salami called Monte Verde. So you must tune in.
Also, we want to remind our listeners the Italian Radio Hour is putting together a cookbook inspired by the recipes of our listeners. If you have a traditional and or regional Italian family recipe that you would like to have included in this cookbook, please submit it to us at our email address, theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We hope to have the cookbook available around Mother's Day, so please don't wait to send us your recipes. And remember, if you or any of your family or friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab.
Vorremmo ringraziare la nostra ospite Michelle Damiani, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e Alla Boara per la musica. Finally, before we leave, here is our trivia question for next week. What does andare in pallone mean? Again, what does andare in pallone mean? You can send in your answers to the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com.
If you're not in the Pittsburgh area or you might be traveling, remember, you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ci sta cenogaro fulador e culirami con magia la via.
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.